That's a big question.
Yeah. We're recording.
Yes, it's
All right. So we're at the tipping point.
Call that the homestead.
We're halfway through the summer. So we kind of have, we're a little, I think we're hitting all of the topics that we had on the agenda, but just not necessarily in the order that we want them. So what I want to do is go back to the conversation that we started yesterday about EDP. Because I think that it still provides some of those opportunities to think through like how we get from everybody in the room going, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do it, to actually doing something. And I think part of it is that we don't always talk about like what are the steps and what are the activities that need to occur in order for that to really happen. So I'll try summarizing this and you can correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Okay.
So there's an aspect of this that we're talking about that is technology oriented. So there's a technology component to EGP providing some infrastructure capability related to ARC servers and okay, I'm getting a nod. I can say words, I just don't always know what they mean. So I think there's a technology component to it, right? So we want to make sure that when we talk about this, are we talking about, is the question or the comment about the technology component of it? And the EGP's role is as basically an infrastructure capability, right? Then I think there is a program aspect to it because we want to start thinking about, okay, so if we have this technology capability, this infrastructure capability, then what type of support has to go along with that? What do we really then expect? Is there an EGP team that is going to provide some service related to that then? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that we just kind of need to think through that as a community so we're clear about it, because the last thing we want to do is set up some expectation and then call it a failure because they didn't deliver, but it wasn't really something we ever asked them to do, right? So that's kind of that people program type part. And then there is the process or governance type aspect. And so I want us to kind of keep those in mind as we're thinking about them, make sure that as we're discussing that we're clear that we're talking about either the technology, the program component, or the process component, so that we're not confusing ourselves and walk out of here worse off than we started. That would be really sad. So what we talked about is EGP kind of stepping up as this backbone, infrastructure type backbone with some technology capabilities. And then we're going to kind of need to go from there. So Patricia and I have been talking, Chuck and I have been talking about fire environment. We have, since FEMS started development, been working really closely with them because we knew IDME was coming up, we knew EGP Next Gen was coming up, and it just seemed like a good opportunity. We had Patricia was the project manager for FEMS and the project manager for IDME, and so like there was some good synchronicity there. And over the last year and a half, 2 years with FEMS, Patricia's always got these good questions from a project management perspective and trying to understand like how do these things fit together? And then the business leads for FEMS have been having some conversations themselves about like, is this really where we want to be going? Is this really what we need? That type of stuff. And so they've been communicating with Chuck and Patricia about that. And so I've asked them to kind of weigh in because I think Patricia's representation of what the business is talking about for FEMS right now gives us some good places to like dig in to like, what would this really mean for the community if EGP is in this role? Like, how do we start making some decisions about what that does for an application and how the application makes decisions and what the needs are and kind of back and forth that way. So really want this to kind of be an engaging conversation and we just kind of need to brainstorm, I think, a little bit about what is needed to support this type of big transition in our community. So.
I'll do my best, I
All right.
guess. Yeah. And I wish Chris was here because, him and Eric and I had a conversation in the hallway yesterday, I think to clarify some of the conversations we had the first day. So Eric, I'm gonna lean on you to, kind of step in and step up here to
Which Chris?
Chris Martel.
He's outside. You see that? He should be here inside.
Yeah, I saw him walking around the parking lot doing laps. So again, it's about creating efficiencies and maybe centralizing some of this governance structure about how we kind of manage our IT infrastructure. There's but it's not going to be a one size fits all for everybody. Obviously, we're trying to cut down on our licensing costs, cut down on some of our end costs, and really just provide a capability that could benefit the community. And so there's less overhead to manage, that kind of thing. Same thing as I reiterated the other day. We talked about some of the mapping capabilities and things like that. Again, everybody's going to have maybe some slightly different needs for what they need to do as far as, mapping and the visualization. But I think there are some definite efficiencies that we can create. Not that the EGP team will be able to provide you all the, the person power or, skill set to do everything for you, but we can at least build the framework out to start, dipping our toe into that pool and seeing where can we create some, mechanisms for people to kind of manage less overhead and kind of do that. And then we have one kind of centralized place to help us provide that governance. So we don't have, say 6 or 7 applications all over the place that are trying to manage things. And it gets really hard as you spider web out and everything that it touches, then, that governance structure gets really hard to maintain. So, Eric, do you want to kind of tie into some of that, what we talked about yesterday with Chris in the hallway too?
Yeah, sure. I guess from my perspective, it really comes down to 3 things, right? It's internal architecture, being duplicative in multiple areas. We talked about servers, licensing, all this other stuff. Fiscally, we're all spending money on a lot of services we can probably centralize somehow, right? We've got to figure that out. And then thirdly, it's more about what services do we need to provide out to the community. So we need to define the capability, right? What is a capability we want to be in regards to this geospatial thing, whatever we want to call it. And so I think the internal architecture, the fiscal portion of it, we can handle that. What we don't know is what are the services? What should this capability provide, right? What are the services you want this capability to provide? 2 easy ones is geospatial analytics and mapping, right? Probably 2 easy ones. But what beyond that could something like an EGP, AGOL, IDME thing provide that we haven't thought about? And then once we define that capability, then we need to agree as a community that this thing is that thing that's going to provide those services and standardize, so that not everybody's building their own thing later on, right? Every application is building their own mapping service or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's what I envisioned. That's what we were talking about.
I think
we can get there.
Yeah. I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we're pretty close to it. So it's just a matter of, like I said, the first 2 things, those are easy ones. We can work those on the back end, the architecture and the fiscal part of it. But to me, it's more about the services, because based on what the community defines as being a service, that's going to inform as to what we need to build this thing to be. That's the big one.
And I think we need to vocabulary to talk about services, because I think you're talking more of like data services, like a data services catalog, like the capabilities. Whereas like, on the geospatial side, we'll talk about like, specific like feature services or something like that. But that also goes back to, I got you. Goes back to, what are those services that we agree on that, we talked about doing like an analysis of, looking at all those services that overlap in all of our applications that we all use. And, that's a good place to start. If there's, 25 layers that, 80% of our applications or 85% of our applications are all using, that's probably a good place to start chunking away at those feature services or that reference data that we're all using. That would be a good maybe fit to kind of prototype in that, that centralized architecture for our GS server, and I'm gonna try to not say EGP because I don't want to say it. I mean, we're talking about a capability for the enterprise is what we're really talking about. Go ahead. Well, you had your hand up.
Yeah. That's
Stop it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the feature services, which are the layers, which I was talking about yesterday for the national base layers. Updating those and, just what goes into making certain changes in those base layers. So I'm wondering how, when you think about modifying the layers that is gonna be in the, whatever we're calling this, how would there be a management team to update those layers, or are you thinking the applications that, I don't know, like, how would that happen?
Well, and I think we need to do some analysis there and identify, what do we manage and maintain internally? What can we serve out through the open data site so we don't have to even worry about authentication in, we just throw that out in the open data site. We manage it on the back end, throw it out on the open data site, then everybody consumes it from there, but we do the back munging on the back end, on the internal side. And then, those other layers that we agree on that we all use, but they're outside of our control that we just pull in. But then maybe we can start getting some more agreements in place for some of those layers, because right now we had something with the Nowcoast data just recently that a lot of us use, and Ani knows this, that come from, outside areas. I think it's NOAA that manages those Nowcoast data. And they changed a bunch, they deprecated a bunch, they changed their service platform, and they didn't tell anybody. So, starting this year when we started analyzing all of our layers in EGP, I don't know, 25-30% of them were all broken or they deprecated them. We had no idea because we don't have those agreements in place that we even know when they make those changes or deprecate things. So that would help all of us, again, kind of manage that data. So we're not all caught off guard and chasing, the same, rabbit trail with NOAA, because there's probably, I'm sure, Woofdis or somebody else was chasing the same thing that we were chasing, and we're doing that multiple times across many applications. So if we could, find those common areas, then we wouldn't all have to be chasing it. We could, say, let's get an agreement in place. They let us know when things are changed or deprecated, and then we kind of all manage that. That way we're not having 5 to 6 applications chasing the same thing. So I see the efficiency there. Well, with those agreements, as well as a place for us to manage those layers that we have control over internally.
If I had control over some of those layers, I would just open Arc Pro, edit them directly.
Publish it. Yeah.
Through the service.
Yeah, and if it's open data,
Yeah.
it's open data, approved. Yeah, then we would then publish it to the open data site through our process that we have right now through the UGP. Which is, we do that already. We have a group and we publish, we share the feature with that group and then it goes to the open data site. So that's kind of the flow I envision.
The project teams do the same thing.
Yeah.
Instead of, now they're editing their data on-prem, maybe, or wherever they are.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
do that process, okay.
But then we own that data.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, not in
Yeah, for the
AGOL.
data.
Yeah.
And I think that's the type of requirements that we need to gather.
Mhm.
I think we want to start with the easy wins, the infrastructure and the fiscal part of it, the contracting should be fairly easy, although I say that and you know how long it takes to do contracts, but
Do-
that's the foundational component to this whole thing. And then everything else we can build on top of that. So if the community is asking for X, Y, Z, can we meet that requirement? And if we can, those built into it. If we can't, then let's be transparent about it and figure out how to accomplish that work. But if we don't move forward on at least on the unification of the architecture, and then also on figuring out more how to be more fiscally responsible with some of our licensing, we're not gonna be able to accomplish the rest. So, yeah, that's what I want to hear is, yesterday we were talking about everybody uses geospatial one way or another. That's what I want to know, like, what way are you using geospatial? Build that as a requirement, and then talk about what can this new thing do that might be able to take over that requirement, right? I mean, I'm not a GIS specialist, and I know very little about the technology as far as the underlying portion of it. So you gotta tell us, how are you using it so that we can try to build it into this process.
But
Also, just to sort of build on what you were saying, how are we using it? I'm finding on FEMS that a lot of times why mapping was brought into it was because, the business needs at the time and the users really is like, well, we want to be able to visualize the data. We want to see it on a map. And so my question for you is, when you guys say a mapping service, what does that mean to you guys? Because I think it's great to like centralize where the knowledge is, the experience, the license, all that kind of stuff. Like where to build that out rather than having it all of the separate applications. So I'm all for this concept. The question is, what is that? I'm trying to understand, like, if you guys have, when you say a mapping service, does that mean like a FEMS user that somehow we could, like a user wants to map something, would be able to click and it goes and it like opens a screen in EGP, and it just that they have to go over to EGP? I'm just trying to like picture from the user side so I can envision this new like way of delivering these capabilities. Is that, have you guys have any thoughts on that yet?
So, I mean, at the first, like, you know, we always saw crawl, walk, run, you know, all phase. I mean, getting infrastructure, like Eric said, getting, you know, figuring out the financial stuff where we can consolidate some of those costs. And then providing the services out would be the first initial step. If we're talking about sharing a consolidated map viewer across all these applications, because, you know, it's going to take a while for IFTDIS to change if we consolidate and say you have to change your viewer, or WFDIS or FEMS, you know, if you get, you know, too far ahead of us before we can actually get some of this stuff done. And then EGP is still in transition, obviously, from our current, you know, capabilities to where we're going next. So, I mean, that's going to take some time, but I think providing the services, like the feature services, map services, you know, that kind of thing, we can start there. But you're talking a viewer, which that's going to take a while to figure out what are all those requirements for all those different applications. Can we really consolidate that into one or just a couple things? Or are we talking about, you know, I think I just heard Game of Thrones on Steve's computer, like, you know, are we talking?
When you say then the current like a map service that an application could, because you go behind the scenes for a map service, what does that mean? Like,
Well, feature services and map services are different. So feature services, you can, they're both services, ArcGIS, like REST endpoints. But the feature services you can query and interact with. A map service is basically like a picture that is served out that you can't really interact with very much. You can't really do any analytics against it, that kind of stuff. So when we say a map service and a feature service, those are both just kind of served up services, but they behave in different ways in how you interact with them. Go ahead, John.
So I think that's similar. You basically provide us a map service for that, and that's what we click on. We put a URL, when somebody's in our system, they want to see where the route station is. The URL that is your map service. It brings out EGP. It's seamless to the user. They don't realize it's going to EGP. It brings up a map. And you're right there on the screen. It's a new tab pops up, and boom, the weather station shows up. And then they can hover over it, or click on it. It gives them all the metadata from there. Because we didn't want to provide any geospatial, but we have users that say, "I see it on a map." So that's
What if
one
they
of
want
those
to-
that we're using.
what if they want to set a query and then like, I want to see like this data for this point in time. You know, and bring up a map and have it show that, like, how would that work in this mapping service?
Well,
world
that-
order?
That's a requirement we'd have to explore because that's not a current capability.
So I know that in ours, about the only thing I can quote do is, I could, because when I look at the URL, I can edit the URL and I can put in a different. So the default, I think, is like a 9. I can go do something else. So what I would expect is if you had a different need, you would just go in and change some of those variables. Like when we provide our REST service for weather, you can set start time and end in the URL. You can also choose to pick it just for a single station. So in the URL, you could do that. So if you knew it, I would just imagine if it was important, you could create a little UI that fakes it. You know, that passes those two pieces of information and it automatically gets it, but it's still their service.
Yeah, it would pass it into basically that query against the service, but we don't have that capability where it's a easy user interface, like, here's, how you would, modify this query to go, hit that feature service and then return exactly what you're looking for. You'd have to know like how to write like a, small like query against that REST endpoint. But
Or
you
it's a yes, if you do this.
Yeah.
And then we built in a little UI where if you wanted to know the unit that you just want to look it up, we have a little UI, just picks it as a type ahead quick pick, or you can just pick it in, you type it in, and it gives you the information. So, I mean, those are the things that can be,
and they're
make it easier for the user, but it still leverages back, is all they care about is that one line that goes to them.
Yeah, and I mean, and those things are fairly easy to code and write. I mean, but just things that we would have to gather those requirements, Patricia, and then figure out. But
I think one of the advantages of doing this is that as a community, we have a lot more sway to work with other companies to do these sorts of things. So a good example is we're building something now in ServiceNow within the National Park Service. And we went to Esther and say, hey, we want to be able to service a map on ServiceNow. They're like, we don't have that capability, right? So you can't do it right now in ServiceNow. So like that's what we want. So we went back and pushed and said, we have all this power behind the wildland fire community that with all these dollars we're spending on Esther, you're telling us you can't do this one thing. And sure enough, they went back and they built this capability to where now we can use our National Park Service GIS architecture to serve up a map on ServiceNow. Like they couldn't do it before, but we asked them and we kind of pushed them on for requirements. They said, yeah, sure, we'll look into it and we'll build it out for you. And so similar to this example, right? If the capability doesn't exist today, maybe using the full force of the wildland fire community can say, here's what we want and work with us to get it.
yeah, and we do have a lot of leverage if we do, kind of come in as a common voice with a lot of these vendors and offerings. Yeah, if we say Park Service wants to do this, Fish wants to do it, BLM wants to do it, Forest Service all wants it, they'll lean in on it. Even like Esri, if you just have one agency coming to them, they're going to kind of poo-poo you and say, we'll get around to it. But if we all come at them from a wildland fire perspective as a group, then they tend to kind of step up and give us, good people to help us solve the problem. So I think it behooves us, I like using that word, to kind of, pool our powers on some of these things where I think we could see like a good return on investment.
So I'm wondering.
No, sorry, somebody else.
Sorry. So I'm wondering, like with our conversation this morning about the portfolio management, like what types of questions did we want to ask and collect information on? Maybe we should focus on identifying applications that are using spatial data, presenting a spatial view. Is that, maybe is that a way to focus so that so that then we can have a more informed discussion? And as you were talking, Eric, about we build the infrastructure and then we've got to start transitioning licenses, right? Well, if we don't even know who all has them right now, that's going to be pretty challenging for us to monitor and anticipate, oh, we've got 3 that are going to expire this year and 5 more that are going to expire next year, so we can plan for it. So it just seems like maybe focusing the portfolio effort on identifying.
No, that's exactly right. And so what you're talking about really is a piece of what would be a project plan, right? So we would designate this. I want to call it a project plan because that gets people upset and that sounds bureaucratic, but it's a piece of that, right? So it'll be, it would be the start of that, right? So let's just take that little chunk of it and we would load it into that tool, name it. I was thinking the geospatial integration portal, but the acronym for that is GIP. So
That's definitely negative connotations.
Where's Larrabee? Larrabee is the acronym guy.
So I'll come up with a name for it, and let's start to define that out, and then eventually it would fall into that life cycle chart that Chris had, right? So that we were making sure we got the buy-in we need. We kind of be at the far left of that chart for right now, and we would start to kind of move it through that. And we go to, at some point we need to talk with Who's doing Sean about, how to resources. I don't think we've had that conversation yet. Let's just figure out what we're up against.
But we have to start somewhere to look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean,
And I think,
and if
I see
it,
Chris writing notes. I think he's already got some
Yeah,
ideas on
and
how to
if-
start that.
and if we get to a point and we come to realize it's not gonna work, or it's too tasking or taxing, and, we don't have the
Or we can't do
resources,
it.
or we just can't do it, because we don't have an environment to, that everybody can play in, well, then, then we stop there and, move on, but at least we say we gave it, our best college try.
Put it back on the shelf.
Well, that's some of the concerns. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we could send out an email to everyone, all the PMs. That's inventory, and just that is that you have spatial in your investment. If yes, then we continue with just that group
Yeah,
on the follow-ups.
And I mean, there could be, three simple questions. Who's your Esri contract with, when does it expire, and how are you doing your licensing, and, and for what, products?
What products?
So
Yeah.
is it Esri that we're looking after, or are there other mapping services that are?
Well, there could be other ones we could chase, or there could be an Esri component. I mean, we're still locked into Esri at the government level right now. I
Sure.
mean,
But there are other resources like FME that we.
FME that we want to look at too, that, Parks
I'm
Service.
just saying, let's not narrow that.
No. And we want to still explore probably like, open source, Ani and team, I know I've looked at some of that too.
Sure.
I think it's a little harder to deal with because, federal government doesn't love open source, but there are a lot of people that like using it, like research.
Sure.
So, there may be a component of that in there too, as well, to give us, some capabilities to allow for that kind of open sandbox of the open geospatial offerings.
Sure, and don't we use different mobile mapping resources as well?
Yeah.
Aren't there a few that we use out in the field?
Think of like events and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's Avenza, there's the Esri.
So I'd like to,
Cloud
let's, why
solutions,
don't we
there's
just get the whole
Wood
picture?
Tech. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get the whole picture.
So
so Susan's had her hand up on.
Oh, yeah.
She's got some good stuff in the chat.
This is all negative about me.
No, Cole, it's not negative about you. Sorry, my camera knocked down, so I'm gonna turn my camera off. Sorry, it fell off. So I think this is a really great discussion because, I want to just first address the open source piece, right? At RDNA, we've had this huge challenge of what we've developed and what we've pulled from research and how we tech transfer that, right? And I think we need to concentrate less on the vendors.
Oh, you got muted.
Sorry about that, I muted. So, and just concentrate more on the services, and the example I always like to use is USGS. If you go look at USGS's national map, every service they offer is a REST endpoint or an open source endpoint, almost every single one. I think it's not 100%, but it's like 95% of their services I can use as either REST endpoint, open source, Esri, if I want to. That gives us those options out to our developers so that we're not pigeonholing our developers in a particular development platform. I know we want to kind of keep a loose net over that, but I don't want to see people not use something like Leaflet or some other open source thing because we're not giving them the service capability we need to. And we've seen that from both ends of the spectrum, right? We've seen us be unable to use open source services because they aren't configured right. And we've seen us be unable to use, say, an image service because our developer doesn't know how to use an Esri image service. So I think we need to keep this net as wide as we can so that our developers have room to play, because that's what we want our developers to do, right? We want them to be creative. We want them to have the space to play. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say in terms of what Cole's talking about, infrastructure, to me, it's a chicken and the egg thing, right? If we build the infrastructure, they will come. Why? Because they have to. Cole and IFTDIS and EGP and Inform, we've all been aligning those reference services for the last, what, Cole, 5 years? We've worked a lot together to say, these are the reference services I'm using. These are the reference services I'm using. Let's use the same services. Some of those services we can control, and those are the services I would suggest we identify and start with the infrastructure build on, because people will start to move to those. And then the last comment I'd like to make is I think I'm the only, maybe not the only one now, but I recently took the Esri Kubernetes class. Why did I take it? Because we are really aware that WFDS Next Gen, we're starting to do some intense testing to make sure it can handle the load. And Kubernetes is really a solution that we want to look at, but it's overkill for one application. WFDS Next Gen cannot afford the infrastructure to implement Kubernetes on our own. It's huge, it's big. It's also pretty well designed. I have a love-hate relationship with Esri. I was fairly impressed. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. We had a site, a standard site scripted and up in 15 minutes. And we were able to configure that site to load balance or to scale up in about 5 minutes to do automatically scaling. And that to me was the key for this community, right? When is our data used the most? The height of fire season, we got to scale. So my feeling is that we start with the infrastructure, and what we can identify are the services we all use, maintain, that we maintain, and we build it there. And that's where we start. Because to me, like I said, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's a chicken and the egg thing. And if we start with the infrastructure and start offering the services, then people will have to use them, I think.
Yeah, I 100% disagree with you, Susan.
I'm glad, Cole.
No,
Our track
and-
record remains the same.
Okay, yeah, and that is a good point on the Kubernetes though, because do we really want every application to learn how to set this up and manage it? Or do we want to
I
provide
do not.
that offering with a skill set that knows what they're doing, understands how to manage and maintain that? And then, you know, that way every single application team does not need to get spun up on it. So Amanda Rumsey, is that who it was? Go ahead, Amanda.
Hey, yeah, just following up kind of what Susan's saying, you know, that first step of developing this list of services that we all use. We do have a SharePoint list that we maintain for the 150 services that we pull into WFDS and IFTDIS. And, you know, we're working on a service monitoring system that is going to be able to check when those services are down. Again, it's starting at the SharePoint list, but we want to move it to Edge. So if the first step of this is compile this list, we can take what we have in our SharePoint list, put it in Edge, and then the community can build off that list and say EGP can go in and say, okay, I use this service, I use this one, or whatever applications are pulling in. But the point is we have a base list. There is a fire owned field, so it might be a good separation between what we're pulling externally and what we, like the fire community, owns. If we go to this kind of enterprise system where we're hosting data internally and pushing it up through some sort of portal or through ArcGIS Online's Open Hub. So
Yeah.
we're definitely here to help if in next steps if needed.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, as the Dave's team over there, you've been doing this, you know, great work for a while and compiling these lists that we've all utilized for a long time. But I think that's another good point is that monitoring, because that's something we've talked with, you know, Ani and the ICF team on the new contract. Monitoring has been, you know, killing us on, we don't even know when these services go down until a user tells us, because we don't really have any good monitoring in place. And so again, if we're all chasing monitoring on these shared services that we're utilizing together, is that really a good use of our time? Or do we, you know, put in one monitoring tool that kind of overlaps all these services that we're sharing? And then we don't each have to maintain our own separate, you know, monitoring tool, whether that's, you know, ArcGIS Monitor or some sort of other monitoring tool, you know, like, yeah, go ahead, Patricia.
Well, I was gonna say, I think what you're talking about is the total, like, it's a very strong architecture approach. The one little thought is definitely you're gonna have to circle to what this means from a contracting and acquisition because of, and I don't know much on it, but I just want to, I know enough to like ask the question, just make sure that like all this approach is you're working with the contracting office so that you don't get in a situation of do a name brand situation on a contract, because that can get to be a problem. Like what that all means, I don't know, but I just know enough to ask the question. So I just want to throw that out there for consideration.
And that's for the Shannons and the Erics and the Uzos and triplets to figure out. And then, well, contracting obviously
But
too.
like what you guys are talking about is, you know, that is definitely why enterprise architectures are put in place and have been in companies. It's just government space.
Yeah.
There's a whole extra layer of complexity.
It's a government space and we're interagency, which
Yeah.
makes it even slightly more difficult. Good.
Well, it triggers a thought. So as we're looking at transitioning these licenses, right? So if we've got multiple instances of servers and licensing, like, it feels like there's an acquisition part of this. Like we have to figure out, is there going to be like a canned statement that everybody's going to start putting in contracts that says, this is the environment that you're going to use regardless of which agency the contract is the managing partner, right?
Yes, the part that I think the program board needs to take up is like, if we're gonna do this, we need to have agreements that we're gonna do certain things in a certain way moving forward, right? So that's one of them, is how you build your new contract. The second one is we're actually gonna use the same services that we're providing, that sort of piece. But yes, one thing to keep in mind is that, we don't have, there's maybe a little bit of extra bump funding in EGP, but we're gonna have to maintain what we currently have too. We're not gonna be able to build a totally new capability on the side. We don't have that type of money. So we're going to have to do this in two phases. One is trying to figure out where we can streamline and where we can be optimized for current usage, either by licensing or architecture, whatever that looks like. And then two, understand what are those requirements. So do like the requirements analysis to figure out, okay, what is it the community is asking for? And as we gain cost savings, figure out where we build those requirements, right? What are the priorities? What are things that we're missing? I don't think we're going to get, let's do something big. So maybe we'll get $50 million we can build this thing out of, but
Maybe we can rip that 69 million away from NASA.
from NASA,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe.
No, that was DHS.
Oh, yeah,
Just to be clear.
That's where a one-time can actually benefit, get to that bump, because you do have the programmatic. So as long as you don't lose the programmatic, and ideally it doesn't go up. If anything, if it does slightly become more efficient, then you can get it. But that is where one of those few times where that one-time money can give you that, and you can leverage it.
Yeah, like a 3-year
As long
bump
as they don't
where,
try to force you, kind of like when we did Irwin, we showed that we could save $300 million by just having all those dispatchers not get her that long 26 different times and get it wrong. But we told them those were opportunity costs. Those were not. That you're going to get that money back. It just means that those people will now be able to use that money for something, or use that time to actually be a dispatcher, not be an inputter. It needs to be the same conversation. It doesn't mean that the EGP doesn't need future funding. Now provide that and have an opportunity.
some efficiencies.
An infrastructure and a different thing with the same.
So this is, Kara and I've been having a conversation for a while. And we've kind of circled around it a couple of times, and I'm just wondering, like, if you think back to the way we did Irwin originally, right? We had seed money that when we went to an application and said, like, I remember signing the authorization to give Wildcat $438,000. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I hope I'm doing the right thing. So it was great, right? And it really helped with getting the integrations up and going. And then it went away. And so I'm wondering if there's, like, maybe, is there a way that we can, through with it, say, request some money for a bump up like this, right? Say there's a specific activity that we want to do. It's development that's, it benefits the enterprise, and have like a pool of money that then can be distributed for priorities that we determine as a collective are important. And maybe it's to EGP, or maybe it's that we have some new data standards that we have approved and it affects like 10 applications. And so we're going to give them some money to help them get those standards implemented, or I'm just curious if that's maybe a way that we can support this type of work instead of the applications trying to figure out how to solve it all themselves.
So let's find out if we need it first, right? So by the way, Kubernetes is actually an AWS service, just saying. What you're talking about, Rochelle, this is just basic project management, right? So just let's do what we've already done. We've already done a lot of this, right? Let's think through what this would look like in terms of a project, right? So it's a business case and project plan. It's not that hard. I've written 1 million of them. We can do that. I think Chris has already probably written 2/3 of it already, actually, just from the stuff we did back in 2018 with those. So if we can show that this makes sense and that there's potential savings and it's not pie in the sky kind of savings, that this is actually pretty straightforward, you can push that forward into a budget request. I mean, and we're not really even asking for that much money, quite frankly.
But I think the thing is, so
The reason we haven't done it before is we just didn't have this kind of consensus. The community is, we just couldn't get that far. If we can get that far this time, then
Big
I think we.
caps, I mean, low caps, because if this turns out to be a Forest Service thing, it's gonna instantly hit their cap and they're gonna say, we're already cutting.
Well, so let's not worry about Forest Service caps just yet, John. Let's figure out what it is. Maybe we run it up the DOI side, if that's gonna be a problem on the Forest Service side. Let's take advantage of the interagency part.
What I
Well-
want to do is use two things though. So I'm talking, there's two phases. There's the one, what do we need to do today? Look at our internal architecture and our fiscal responsibility, right?
Yes.
And two is this next thing. I agree on this next thing, we're gonna need that bump up, so we should start doing some of this legwork to get there. And then, but for now, we do have funding on the EGP side where we can start moving on things and not having to delay on that end.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
100%.
We may need some help with the hosting solution though, that
Yeah.
can be, you know, open to the interagency community. So it isn't just tied to the Forest Service or just the DOI.
Right.
We need to figure that piece out as well too, because
there the cap is a problem, John. I agree.
yeah, 'cause this is where we need to, you know, if we're gonna truly do something like this, it has to be open to everyone. You know, and maybe give a little leeway to get, you know, different developers from different teams in there to play.
And we have the environment already. I mean, we're gonna talk to Buzo about it, right?
Yeah.
The problem is, More about-
Yeah,
Yeah, we got
Buzo has his hand up.
Oh,
okay.
well, we'll get to him last. Go ahead. Boo.
Fair. I'll sit back.
Oh, Amanda had hers up again?
Yeah, Amanda was first and then
Yeah.
Buzo.
Okay, Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm sitting here and I'm trying to wrap my head around, you know, all kind of things we talked about yesterday with like the NASA the architecture kind of discussion and seed money for a joint office. You know, is it too late to have that ConApps kind of help brainstorm for an architecture like this? And I guess the second point is, you know, like we talk about money to kind of get this moving forward, a consolidated infrastructure makes total sense for what you would need for a joint office. So maybe that's like is it possible to use that funding to kind of get this going? I don't know. Questions I think above my pay grade here, but just things I'm trying to wrap my head around and what we learned yesterday.
So on the first one, absolutely not. Early days on the architecture, right? Those conversations have just started. Folks are gonna be working on that architecture in this room. So we've already talked about how this, not the specific project, but this type of an infrastructure approach is absolutely gonna be part of that architecture. So absolutely not too late, Amanda. The second point, that's FY 25 money for that. So now I don't think you want to touch that, right? I don't think we need to, honestly. I think if we think through this, put together a business case, put together a concept paper or call it a project plan, what we want to call it. Let's see how far we can get on the funding side of it, what's available. And John is right, is you're gonna hit that cap on the Forest Service side, so we'll have to be aware of that.
John is right. You really want to admit that?
We'll be careful how we navigate that. But this is not just a cost savings thing either, right? That's the beauty of this thing. This is an end user, it's an operational impact, right? That happens at cost and benefit too
Well,
as well.
end user and application team, I think, because we free up that application development teams from not managing things on their own. We manage it centrally, and the application teams focus on what they need to do to improve the user experience, and we create efficiencies on the back end for managing all that stuff that they don't care about. They don't care about patching. They don't care about security. They just want their product to work and their services to work. Right. That's what the end user
Yeah, I
wants.
got to reiterate that point, Cole. You are 100% correct. One of the problems that's happening right now is our developers are spending far too much time being solution architects and implementation specialists, and we're paying them an awful lot of money to do that. And we should be asking ourselves, should we be paying them an awful lot of money to do that? And I think the answer is no, we should not.
And I 100% disagree with you again, Susan. Joking. Who's up? Go ahead.
Can I fully agree and disagree with all of you? Would that be okay, Cole? So yes, a lot of for 25, we are putting money into our enterprise architecture. We're standing it out separately, and as a project funding and making it an effort to increase funding for things like Kubernetes, and other AWS efforts. So, circling on this whole conversation, it would be really helpful if we did have some level of what's required, what's understood, what's needed, so that it's not just something we're developing for the applications that are within the OWF Wildland Fire cloud hosting environment, but enterprise across the board. Because we're continuing to move out and develop that environment for the enterprise that we have folks within there. From a security standpoint, yes. The more money we throw at security, the more security continues to kind of comically drive requirements, if you will, because there's a lot of security requirements that are coming out that need to be implemented. So again, if we're going to put an enterprise environment together that supports the secure environment so the developers can do development and not have to do patching, then we kind of need those numbers to be able to put something against. I heard John had 300 million, so I'll gladly take half of that to support this.
So which part was the disagreement?
I'll let you figure that one out, Cole.
Just with me on general purpose or what?
No, they're agree, right? Agree that there's an enterprise need and the funding is needed to support a plus up. All of this holistically fits into it. Security, patching, updates, it can't be separate from development. So, as we look to expand the capabilities within the environment, this needs to be this group or the portfolio team to say, here's where these efficiencies could be supported by this. And it probably won't save money. It will probably cost us money to be more efficient in our development.
So Chris, you said that was happening in FY25?
That is going forward into the FY25 request. Yes.
And are you looking to move your current AWS accounts into a consolidated into that environment?
So they already are in a consolidated environment.
Okay.
I mean, I know not everybody and all interagency applications are within the OWF enterprise cloud hosting environment, but that's where we sit right now. There's a number of applications in there.
Sure.
I do, I'm just trying to place the efforts with the things we've already heard. So when Chris is talking about an effort, lies and architecture, he's talking about what I've called, I may not be using that term, but the DOI AWS environment and centralizing an architecture on that. But then there's the PCAS NASA stuff about an architecture. And I'm just trying to understand when they say they're both making efforts towards that, is Chris talking about?
I think he's talking specifically DOI because we don't have a PCAS environment even identified at this point. I think they gave us some suggestions, but we don't have an actual solution unless we, massage the DOI
That's
environment.
what I'm trying to understand is like removing pieces here when people hear it, use it, call it the same terms, but I think I understand enough to understand it's actually a different part of a whole ecosystem of efforts here.
PCAST and the work that NASA's doing is essentially conceptual to provide a guidance direction for this group to move forward with. We're not going to wait for that. We're continuing to move forward. And as we are moving forward, we are building out these efforts that presumably, hopefully, because hope's the strategy, right? Hopefully will align with what NASA suggests we should be doing.
As Patricia, it's the same, right? Like this is connected to the report that we know, like Chris and I are working on with that. So it's, but any discussion that's happening here is going to go immediately into that document, that effort.
I do think kind of to put a semicolon next to that statement, what NASA is doing in support of the PCAST report is holistically across the spectrum for wildland
Yes.
fire.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not just
Right.
what we consider to be wildland fire IT. The technology in their mind includes enhancements to equipment, what we would consider equipment for, pre-suppression, post-fire activities that we really don't touch.
UAS, traffic management, all that kind of stuff. So it's much broad, it's much more broader, much more broad than this discussion with True Chris.
Yes.
Good distinction. Thank you for mentioning that.
But this is part of it. It's a piece of it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other burning questions from the room or online? Go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering, so I know one of the things that you did was, yes, you. The way that the EGP contract was set up, gives us capacity, right? Capacity-based contracting. And so is there flexibility, or do you have any concerns about anything that we've been talking about not fitting into the current contract?
I don't think anything concerned about the scope of how we wrote the contract and the capacity. We wrote it, phase 3, basically, we are going to be building this architecture, and it would be great if we built a piece of that architecture. Again, I don't want to say EGP, but we could start building that ArcGIS infrastructure for some of these shared services. And, the EGP could use it for our own needs, but if there's, say 10 shared services we all agree on to start with, that we could, use and put somewhere, and say the DOI AWS environment, then I think, we could start looking at that and building it out there. Cause we're gonna have to do it anyway. That's part of our contract. So,
Okay.
I don't think there's really, if we allow people to publish their own services in there, if we can kind of open it up to the other applications, like, the RDNA data team, and Amanda and Susan, who maintain a bunch of services, and allow them to publish it, themselves, but have that common area, then, we're not incurring any cost by the number of services, probably. It may be some cost when it comes to data transfer and, cloud hosting, but we'd have to look at that. But, if we could pool some money to kind of, recover those costs, from different projects, depending on, how much they're using. I know IFTDIS, has, a ton of data in there. And so does, WFDIS as well, but probably way more than the EGP does. But, we could start looking at that and how we do like a cost share on something like that for that backend hosting, but building it out, I think it is already part of our plan. So I don't think that really comes into play there.
Okay.
It's just, the bigger we make it, if we do go enterprise, then that's where the cost is gonna, and then that's when we're gonna have to start looking at kind of that cost share of, how, NIFC AGOL right now.
Yeah.
We try to kick in money so Park Service doesn't, take the whole brunt of that. You barely give them anything right now, but we gotta plus that up, and we're trying to be the same with something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a scope. Go ahead on.
So, one of the things that, we can do is, in the last 3 months, we collected we looked at the legacy infrastructure, across apps, data, app interfaces, FME, you name it, we are collected that information. So then we can actually, let other people also look at it, especially, the layers, information that is, on the Esri side.
Yeah.
And see if you guys are using the same thing. You know what I'm saying? We have like 250 different, APIs. I have the list right here. Look at it, let your teams analyze that and come back and say, hey, you know what, half of these we use. Instead of us actually developing our own custom app on Esri, can actually share it, right? When you actually take it to NG, that is next gen, and that way, at least we are doing collectively something together. So maybe we can share that.
Yeah.
Across this group.
Yeah, it's nothing, it's all our data, so.
Yeah,
nothing
it's all
proprietary.
internal
Yeah,
data.
Yeah.
That
Same
one
thing
is
with
a-
like WFDS's and IFTDS's,
Yeah.
data workbook or data mapping sheet, it's all, just data that we pull and kind of agree on, like, here's where we're getting this, if you want to use it and we're documenting it kind of thing.
Yeah.
The updated version of what used to be on the UGP website or what still is.
It's definitely way updated, yeah, the one on,
Yeah.
don't go to the one on the UGP website.
So we took, when we came in, we took that and then we went in and we found, it was kind of old. It was kind of stale. So, so we have an inventory done, even from the ETL's perspective. Where we are getting the data. It might happen that you might be running a C# code or something on your side or a Python code to get that same thing. We'll be actually moving all of that into one centralized FME service. So, and FME can, instead of just giving it out to EGP layer, you can send it out to anywhere you want. So that way you don't have to run it, and that would be a cost saving. We are doing it on our side by taking and cost with respect to effort, right? C# code and all these other things which eat a lot of CPU. Now, if you take that and we have the plans of putting FME on service to scale that as a result, and these services, we are looking at services which can actually scale up and down, automatic scaling. Even looking at serverless. So some of the serverless services. Internally, FME can use those serverless services where we don't have to manage on AWS. I'm saying if we go at AWS again.
Yeah.
If you're going Azure, again, that determination has to be done, but you have serverless functions on Azure. FME can use and later on send out those same layers to NPS, to DOI, doesn't matter. It just pool can get some few dollars every time.
Fee, yeah, commission.
Do I get like a penny every time somebody hits the surface? It'll add up.
Oh, sorry,
No, that
was
was.
I too upfront about the?
No. Those are all good points, Sonny. Yeah, and I think that's a great idea to share out, what we get from that analysis with, the other project teams and, the ones that are geospatial heavy and start, having us all take a peek at it and just see there's probably going to be, a bunch of stuff that stands out glaringly right off the bat that we're duplicating or, duplicating storage, duplicating efforts, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Well,
So,
it's really hard to understand too, from where the data's been when you see it, like for RAWs, but we put that on the open data side, I didn't realize it went through EGP first, and from where it originally comes from,
it hops around a
Yeah,
lot.
it makes its way around.
Yeah, and then it
To
gets
see
very.
where it's coming from.
And it gets very confusing because then we have to keep track of those time delays. Well, EGP pulls it down this often,
Right.
but then it only sends it to the NIFC ArcGIS Online that often, all that kind of stuff.
And then the details going on.
And then Susan
Right.
and team are probably pulling it for
Yeah, then you
WFDS.
can touch it.
Yeah, yeah,
The
and
trail it's going.
it gets to be a bunch of spaghetti.
I can, very quickly show what we have collected. We can talk about it more. Especially the RAWs, ETL.
Yeah.
I documented that, from API perspective all the way down to business logic into metadata behind it. So I mean, if you're using the same thing, you can technically use that. You know, we have it in C# right now. The thing is that we are moving on FME soon. So what we are doing is that taking everything which is there all over the place and just consolidating them into one tool.
Mhm.
And one tool, one stack, so that when we move this tool and stack over into the cloud, everything goes away and everything is co-located in one place in cloud.
The reason it's different than AGOL or RTS Online is because we have more control of what we do with the layers, right? Like as far as.
Or you have way more options for customization.
Uh-huh.
And we have ownership of the data then too, as well. So this is the thing that Skip and I talked about. I mean, RTS Online is fantastic for what it does, but there is still that need for a back-end government-owned infrastructure of, RTS Enterprise or server, or whatever you want to call it. But it allows us more flexibility and more control of our own data.
So when you say us, does that mean like GIS people can go in and edit the data like we do,
Well-
but have more power?
Well, I mean, we say GIS people, we're not going to open it up to the masses. It would be, yeah, it would be like the Susans, the Amandas, the application development teams and that kind of stuff.
They would go in.
Yeah.
But I'd like to add to this. I mean, that's been the goal of NextGen all along, right? Is not to silo this data. So not just to make it available to the Susans and Coles and Emmys of the world, but to make it available to the LTANs and the FTANs and the analysts and the planners and the fuels folks that are out there doing this work, and make it, so that data is at their fingertips and is pretty seamless to them getting it, and that we're all assured we're hitting the same data, right? The effort we're doing in fuels is a big example of that. Right now, we're trying to dovetail all these fuel sources into a single, one ring to rule them all fuel source. Will we pull that off? I don't know yet, but we're trying, right? And that's what we're doing, right? We're all on the journey to Mordor right now. Whether we get out or not, I don't know.
Good references, Susan. And I think I maybe interpreted it a different way. Totally agree with you. We want to get that to all those people, but I thought Emmy's question was more for people like actually editing the data.
Yeah,
And
editing and then, the
publishing services.
Gotcha. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that part, Emily. Yes, absolutely. And your point about taking this into a, portal type structure where we have more control over that security. We've been fighting this in NextGen, right? How are we going to control all this editing of spatial fire planning? Well, if I put my hat on from years ago, I would have hooked everything into Active Directory, and I would have created users and groups, and I would have applied those permissions at the database level and kept people out of data that shouldn't have been in the data. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. We've got to figure out a different way to control those accesses to who has the ability to read and write the data. So yeah, I got you now. Thanks, Emmy.
Okay. Julie.
Oh, you were cool, and I wanted to add, and the Julie's.
Well, yeah. Yeah. No,
I missed that, Julie.
Yeah, you're definitely included in that group too. Yeah, but we just didn't have time to list everyone. And I was staring directly at Emmy, so yeah.
Trying to get myself putting my hand up.
Well, I kind of figured you would probably put your hand up quite a bit during this conversation.
So as Ani was talking about the stuff that you've collected, Donna and I were like, ooh, we want that in Edge. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's, so that starts helping us really build that inventory of what services, what ETL processes,
Have the collection started.
Yeah, we
And
have the
tie it
collection
back
started.
to which applications are using
Yes.
what.
Absolutely.
Actually, I didn't get time to work with Gabriella last time when we spoke in January. She created the collection space for me. I mean, we have a timeline to meet for the phase 2. So I was like, all right, I'll do that later, and then never got time.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if you want, I can show it here very quick. So,
We have time, I think,
Yeah,
on
we have
the
time.
agenda, so yeah, if folks would like to see it.
I mean, it might be useful for others. I mean, because we are going forward, to meet our timing. So.
And yeah, the RDNA team and the data team over there has been working on theirs. I mean, how long has that one been going on, Susan and Amanda? You've been putting that together. I mean, that's prior to both of you probably.
Yeah, probably Andrew.
Yeah.
Which-
I mean,
which-
probably.
Yeah, this was Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, so that's been, I mean, probably been put together for at least, 8 years, 9 years, maybe.
Mhm.
So what I'm showing here is the app and data layer, which might be interesting. And especially, so when we came in, we looked at all the different layers, technically APIs, that were going across, inbound as well as outbound. And there were many which were actually not nobody did cleaned up the inventory. I think it was over 5 years still. So we took that and then we started looking at different applications, especially GIS. If I just click on our GIS, you may find that there are certain layers, APIs that you might be interested in or you might be using already in your applications for GIS. So they're here. We also have the geometric lines as well as the polygon API. So again, I mean, this would be good to host it in a central location like Edge, so that everybody has access and they can actually use it. Going into the service layer and reference areas, if I go into what data it actually collects for each of those, we went into how it all relates to whether it's a ETL or not, how the service layer and reference collects the data and the different tables that it actually pulls the data out of. So each of these layers pull the data out of our huge SQL server. So as you can see, I mean, again, some of them are, you'll have to type in to a SQL server to get that information, but I have the data set, data tables, as well as all the other attributes related to that. Again, one of the things of SharePoint Excel that we found is very difficult to actually do the hierarchies. So that's why I was suggesting using Edge. It's much easier to do the, start with them on, taxonomy, and then you actually roll it down into different domains. Just didn't get time to do that. So these are for FME as well as how the FME produces that data as well as the layer. Similar things we have for Esri services itself. I'm just showing it, just to keep it real quick on one of the things that you said, Emmy, was RAWs. So say, for example, RAWs data, how it actually gets in from Firecop, and then what is the API that we are using? What are the different things that get out of that we get out now? If you want to see the RAWs observations and stations, unfortunately, you have to roll back. Where it actually shows you the exact fields, the business logic behind it, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, we have collected at least this base information, cleaned up some of the things that we had. So that at least gives us a way of consolidating our services. Like we know we are no longer going to be using Python coding or other different types of coding methods, even to actually upskill our people to use FME or some other service, so that we are doing it on our side, because there are a lot of C# coders, there are a lot of Esri coders, so which particular technology they should use so that it's much easier even to actually upskill people. And go into one, again, going back to the people process technology, the right kind of people have the right kind of skill sets and the right kind of processes we have, which we can actually reuse inside something like FME, then you can use consolidate technologies into one or two, save cost as well as effort. And since we are on an agile time plan, we can actually get the velocity of the team much higher compared to like half of it is in C# or half of it is, I need 3 people to do the same kind of job. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's where we are actually focusing on as we are going into. So if anybody needs more information, definitely we can talk about it.
And then I guess Susan and Amanda and Julie, would you want that spreadsheet? Yeah, I include you in the set.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so if we could,
Please.
if you wanna give that to me, Ani, I can give it to those folks. I probably have it, but if you could just send it to me, that'd be easier. Then I'll forward it out to those folks to at least start with. But there's probably a bunch of other folks that we need to share that with too.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's probably something we need to look at to see what we've already got built in Edge for the spatial data, like how that fits in and what else we want to build in there. I know we've got data services catalog,
Yeah,
different things like that. So I think we've probably got a lot of the parts and pieces that they,
expanding that.
but it would really expand that, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
And-
it would be really incredible, right? If we got this stuff that Ani's done for EGP and we bring the WFMRDNA stuff in and do a matchup, like,
You might
and
find
let
a lot
Edge,
of similarities.
yeah, let
At least at
Edge
the
do some of that
base
work.
level, right? I mean, even in the RGIS base service level,
Yeah.
after that you can actually branch out. It branches out into different layers. So, you know, we might be using certain different types of layers, but at least at the base level, even at the first part of the URL, if it's the same, you can technically tell people to actually use the same API. That way you're actually not, you know, because to create that API, the base is what, I mean, if you see in every one of them, the base is the same because we are using it. But now if you look at your application, you might say that, yeah, it's the same thing, man. I'm just going in a different direction. Okay, you can use that same base then.
Yeah. And I think Ani touched on a good point too. FME is kind of the new shiny thing and most of the geospatial or non-developer people probably don't really care or even know about it, but Park Service uses it internally. We use it for the NIFC RGS online organization. EGP uses it. You know, I think the RDNA is using it on EGP and probably on their own side. I mean, it's just, it allows, it's very easy to get spun up as a developer. You don't need to, like Ani said, be, pigeonholed into one sort of development language. Our own people have trained themselves up who are not even developers to be able to, do some stuff. I know Eric Skip's team, has a couple people that have really just kind of gone all in and, have become rock stars for us on a lot of stuff, like with Sean, even with FireGuard and a bunch of other stuff. So it's kind of the way we're all moving to, so we can get developers, doing stuff, but also our own people to kind of get in there and do some really creative workflows. So, I think that FME component is key to when we talk about this enterprise infrastructure would be one of those kind of legs of the table, the chair, I guess.
Yeah, the short term, that's what I want to focus on, is that's and FME.
Yeah.
Because that's the easy wins, right? There are things we can take care of today. So.
Yeah. We already have
Yeah.
like,
And
go ahead,
Ani,
Susan.
oh, sorry. And Ani, great. I just want to give you just a shout out on how great that list was in the ETLs, just like Cole's saying how powerful FME is in the ETLs that you've already documented. I'm thinking there's a lot of sharp people in this room, and I'm thinking people who aren't like Jeremy, who work with FME every day. If we could get some sort of repository using that list, and maybe some tags like RGS Online does, where you can like mention in this model there's looping or time conversion, stuff like that, so we can start pulling from each other, might be good. I don't know if GitHub allows you to kind of post FME models like it does for code, but somewhere would be good for an FME repository.
Oh, that's a really good point, Amanda. I'm sorry, I called you Susan. But I thought I heard right, but
That's
no,
all right. Maybe one day I'll be as smart as her. It's a compliment.
No,
Already are.
I mean, that is the beauty about code. Like, Don found out too from ChatGPT, or, when I used to dabble in Python too. I mean, you would go steal from other people's code. Be like, okay, this is doing what I want to do. I just need to pull up this section and modify it. I don't need to go do a bunch of research on how to do it. This works, and so I'm just going to go grab it and then put in my parameters and minor tweaks, and then I don't have to go figure out how to do that, spend a half a day trial and error. So Same thing with FME, some of our models, I mean, a lot of them are doing the same thing. We just need to, or those workflows, and just kind of pick and choose from something that we know is proven already. And don't even get me started on date time, Amanda. I'll go crazy.
Also, FME 2023, so we are on 2021.6.2. Older version 2023 and the later versions actually have certain reusable components that we can use. It's part of my lab.
Okay.
Which I'm again not able to get to, which I'm going to do. Don't worry.
Yeah, we just upgraded to 2023.2.3, I think it was. And yes, it has a lot more powerful features, and it also finally allows you to define type within an attribute manager, which is like, thank you, FME, it's about time. So it's a very powerful tool. Murta's been using it for a long time, and it's a really powerful tool. It's basically how we've done most of the data translation into WFDS Classic. So it would be nice if we would get together more of a community of practice for FME. I know the Forest Service has its group and DOI has its group, but it'd be kind of nice if we could form an interagency group of FME practitioners to learn from each other, because it is a big learning curve. I know I didn't know it when I came on board here. I barely knew it. I translated CAD data. I had just scratched the surface of that program.
The newer version has something called as reusable modules. What you can do is that if you are on one same server, underlying serverless or even EC2s, what happens is you can actually share. You build a specific reusable component. 5 of the teams can use it. So the thing is that if there are 5 agencies on the same server or in the same landscape, what you can do is that build certain common containers, and they can actually start using it. So that is how you can start building some common language around some basic domains of information, such as date and time, right? Talking a lot about unit, then boundaries, boundary definitions, and then people can take that and then extrapolate that. At least what happens is that they're hinged on certain basic building blocks, like you have some of which Rochelle has. If you look at those, and if we can come up with those reusable components which can be shared, which is very, very generic, then you can actually customize it according to your use, but at least your base is consistent. Start from a consistent base, and then you actually go in your own different routes. From lineage perspective, if you actually click on the lineage, which 2023 gives you, you can go back and see that, hey, what is used by 5 other people in 5 other different agencies, but we are using with this business logic. It might happen that another agency might want to use that same business logic. So that total effort to do anything reduces across the community.
And Cole, you guys are talking about centralizing FME too, right?
We already have one that we allow, the NIFC ArcGIS Online team, some of Skip's team, I think RDNA had some stuff in there. I don't know if they still do right now, but that's kind of was the goal of that when we set up in the EGP. It was an interagency place where we could all create FME, workbenches basically, and ETLs, and so that was the goal of that. And I would like to expand that, to the broader, use that, like, Susan and Ani and, the other folks are talking about. That would be the goal. What, Amy?
So the With Things group is, what role are they gonna play in this?
Well, hopefully we would take some of that stuff that maybe on the Park Service side and put it into the interagency side. So we could then, maybe there's something that RDNA could use from, those ETLs, so we could start sharing a little more. And like Ani was talking about, some of those modules where we could just pull from each other rather than, I know it's easier for, Park Service and some of the WIFIX team because they're all Park Service employees to do it over on that side. But, the idea would be to collaborate and create efficiencies.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking when you were saying.
Yeah.
Landscape, all the details that Walker's doing.
Yeah.
It's kind of over here. And we're like, how did you do that? And they'll explain it, but like, it's hard. You can't see it really.
Yeah, exactly.
But having that, if he's on we're gonna expand the landscape so that it includes.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's park service specific, no need to keep doing it on the park
Yeah.
service side, but if it's interagency specific, you know, fire and WIFIX, let's try to consolidate those in a place where we can all at least kind of have some like oversight or learn from each other on it.
That'll take a load off his team, which I know they're small but mighty, but always overextended. So
Yeah, exactly.
And velocity of the teams increases. Because the fact that you start out with these base components. So even if you have to have still a specific team member, it's not too hard because of the fact that these are your base components, then you start your job from those base components. Because somebody has already spent X amount of effort, $12 to do that. And if GP NG contract, now I'm going into the contract program, if that does that, right? Others don't have to spend that money. Because it's part of the contracting.
And, going back to Eric's point earlier too, SAFE has been one of those, SAFE is the company that makes software for me. They're one of those companies that have been really great working with us. And if we go to them with any ask, I mean, I went and asked them and, I talked to, I think Amanda about this and I can't remember who else. We asked them to come put on a training and they, did a virtual training for like a day, no cost, just came in and, talk through a bunch of stuff with us and let us just pepper them with questions. And if we have a need, they're really good at responding and saying, okay, we'll address that. I mean, it's just, they really like supporting this group of users and, throw out wildland fire and people go, oh my gosh, yeah, we'll do anything to help.
People love it.
Yeah, so.
So Eric, as we're thinking through this, so Steve is saying, okay, we'll put this on the program board agenda and we'll keep, what is it that the program board needs to be paying attention to about this? Or how do we keep? Because I think we can walk away from here and then we go scatter to the wind, right? And then people are going to take off in the direction that they're pointed at that point in time, right? So how do we?
I think Steve already mentioned, we're gonna add it to a recurring agenda for one. Two, we need to work on developing those agreements. We're gonna agree to do X, Y, and Z as a community. We can work on that in the short term.
Yeah, I think it's.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then again, I want to focus on the fact that there's really two components to the short term and long term. And I think we can work on the short term pretty quickly and then focus on how we get to the long term as well. That's where the project plan, additional funding, all that's going to come into play.
Yeah. So I think let's define out the next, what you just did.
Yeah.
The very specific next 2 or 3 steps, go from there and we'll trackify into the portfolio system and we're going to make it a recurring item. And then we got to come up with a name. So we'll leave that to Steve Larry.
And
Steve's back in the room, so.
Yeah, and then we'll,
We need the new acronym, so.
and we'll start some of the initial, building blocks of sharing some of this data between ourselves and not sure the easiest way to do that via spreadsheet. If we don't get it all into Edge, because that may take some time to get all that stuff in there, from, the RDNA spreadsheet and our spreadsheet, but maybe there's an easy way to do a
Shouldn't take too long.
comparison.
So
on that.
3 of us can start that. I do need a 4th service space though, because we're gonna need some data calls.
Smoky Bear.
Well, maybe.
I'll step up.
Yeah.
Say, Steve, we can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the 3 of it, so we were just talking about the next 2, very specific next 2, 3 steps. The 3 of us being Eric, Chris, myself, but I need a 4th service space, which would be, we just nominated Cole.
Okay.
Because we're gonna be making some data calls too. So.
Okay.
And you had your hand up, Kara.
I did, I just wanted to make sure, if we walk away, not everybody was on the same page when we walked away, so I just want to make sure I heard everything, because I know,
Yeah, good.
I think you guys were talking big strategy, right? Overarching strategy, and I think Rochelle asked that question early on about some specific needs, right? The funding, the funding to help assist with some of the participating systems, et cetera. Is that part of that overarching?
Yeah. We're not there yet.
Well, I think, so in my mind, I think it's actually 2 things. Because I think there's this effort that we're talking about around the geospatial consolidation and capability development, right? So if you think enterprise geospatial capability here, but I think there's this other conversation that we'd like to have about, just just even as easy, as simple as the applications that have to do development to maintain connectivity with the integration service. Or this challenge that we've had, like, I feel like we're getting to the point with our data that we're starting to understand, like, okay, if we start like with this DOI disk stuff, right? Like, we're really gonna start making these connections between these database profiles and our glossaries and data standards and all this kind of stuff, which means that then we can start looking at and saying, okay, we have this term or we have this data standard and there are 6 applications that use this data. Have they implemented the standard, right? Because that's what's going to move us towards interoperability. And it's like, okay, well, if we identify that 4 of the 5 haven't updated to implement this standard, like, is there a way to incorporate that kind of original Irwin model where we've kind of got a little pool of money sitting maybe at the WIFIT level that we can say, okay, here teams, we're going to give you,
$1 million.
yeah, $300 million so that you can get this upgrade done in your application without busting your regular maintenance budget.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a separate way of thinking about, I don't know, I know that it's really tricky to do from contracting and all of that kind of perspective, but we figured out how to do it with Irwin. I mean, DOI gave Forest Service money to upgrade applications. We gave money to Wildcat to upgrade applications, right? So we've done it before. So it just seems like maybe if there's this like pool of money that sits at WIFIT and we say, NWCG comes forward and says, this is a priority for us. We really need this application updated because of this business need. And then rather than saying, okay, well, they're going to have to put it in the budget year planning out for years and, hopefully they'll get it and, blah, blah, blah. If we're not all in line, maybe we can say, okay, here's some, WIFIT actually has a pool of money that we can say, okay, what is it going to take for you to make this upgrade? And here's some money to go do that outside of the regular application funding cycle.
Is there anybody can estimate on what that little pool of money might be? Probably not that little.
So I think, so I'll just, how we did that with Irwin is it just went through significant planning. I mean, we worked like 2.5 years ahead of time with each investment that we were going to integrate. And it was just part of the planning process that we worked with them. We identified the data requirements that they had, the things that they wanted to integrate, the things that they wanted to exchange, and then where they wanted to go. So that involved, right? So you just think about all the Wildcat data. Think about all the places it goes today. It's like 100 different systems are receiving that data today. And so all of those systems have to participate in that planning conversation. Okay, and then either back then we gave seed money, to be clear, and what we really wanted to do is develop a pattern of behavior in the budgeting life cycle that the systems accounted for data upgrade and data management. Because even I don't know how many of the applications in the inventory today even still don't have a data management plan in their structure, in their planning structure. And so I don't know that. I mean, that might be something to ask as well, Amy. And so so it's just understanding that look, data integration is a part of our life, and we need to plan for that in our budgets. So let's plan for it. And so if it comes out of a central pool, okay, that's fine. We can ask for a budget for that. But ultimately, it's still going to come down to planning. It's going to be we have to put it in our contract life cycle. We have to put it into our planning life cycle, and we have to be thoughtful about like what is the priority of the data that we want to look at, that we want to get at for that integration. And so this is a great priority area. Okay, it really is. We can gain a lot of efficiencies by doing this. Consolidating of services is always an opportunity.
So Kara
Kara's got a question.
and then Elise.
Well, I guess I hear that, and that makes a lot of sense to me too. I'm wondering, just with this happens frequently, right? That what we think we know when we got started and where we are right now might not exactly in a line.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
Still pay attention to the map. Yeah.
It might not be the right, but it might have evolved, right, as
Right.
far as that goes, because I would look at the partnering applications. Man, do we talk about this? Man, are we working on this? I don't know that we understood how often there's revisions. There
Right.
are NWCG revisions, there are standard revisions, there are changes in terms, there are additional terms. So when we thought about it in terms of, well, this is the one-time seed money, right, to meet those, I don't know that we really understood how much that is impacting with those changes, through every integration. And we try to be really mindful, and you'll see tomorrow, how we handle it as a committee, or as a committee is probably not the right word, but as an extended community, right? Where we say, yep, nope, can't do it. We do not have the bandwidth. We do not have the time. We cannot make this happen. Or yes, we support it. We support it this version. Yes, we support it, but we won't be able to do it this version. There needs to be some more work behind it, et cetera. So I think it's wonderful that that's how we did it, but I don't know that we understood at the time the lift that they constantly have.
Yeah, no, we did, because we actually literally tried to put an interagency agreement in place that literally really actually defined this.
Yeah.
And so, because we knew that the data expansion, because again,
Sure.
once you start doing it, you're just like, I want more,
Yeah.
I want more. And so, but that more costs more money.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's just a matter. But there was just, again, not consensus. We don't concede to that. And so therefore the agreement never got put in place. And so it's just, we've evolved now, I think, as a community, and now we understand the importance of this data work. And so, and I think by finding efficiencies, we can actually figure out ways that, I do think that we can have some cost savings in there. And I don't think it's cost avoidance either. I actually think that there's some cost savings that can be gained by doing the things that you're talking about, Cole.
I mean, that is the goal.
The only other thing I would add to that too is, as far as that partnership, it's a partnership with all the applications, and it's a partnership with the community and NWC.
Yes.
I don't want NWC, if the community has said we need a change to this standard, and NWCG approves it,
Mhm.
and then we have to figure out how to implement it. We've had a lot of conversations, like timing, when in the development cycle that we could possibly make this happen, et cetera. But the other thing too is new standard, you get a new standard, you can have governance on that. Do we govern it, or do we change it because it needs to be changed? And then we got to figure out how to manage that. So, I'm not telling you anything. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, no, it's just work plan management. And I think that's what's going to be great about Edge. So Edge is going to take years to fully populate, right? I mean, this isn't something that's going to happen in a week. And so this is going to take years to fully populate and get it fully robust enough to where when a change in standard happens, but just think about this, 5 years from now, a change in standard happens, we have the ontology mapped out, the business process mapped out, so refined that you say, okay, this particular application that uses that data standard are not going to be able to make that change for 3 years because of where they are in their development cycle. Being able to understand that.
A realistic expectation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is beautiful.
Yeah.
And to me, that would be the goal of what we're trying to get to, is to do predictive analysis of not only the data itself, but actually how do we manage the data and the different services that utilize it.
Yeah.
And so yes.
Oh, no. Well, I think that goes back to, the whole point of what I think Rochelle wanted me to talk about was governance. I mean, it goes back to what Kara's talking about, what Emmy talked about too. And what, I think Susan and Amanda were talking about, and Julie, sorry, Julie. No, but I mean, if we do stand up something like this, I mean, it will take like some governance. We can't just, let everyone just kind of be a free for all, because it could turn into a junk pile really quick.
Sure.
So there will have to be some governance, and we will have to look at that, if we are truly going to manage an enterprise infrastructure like we're talking about here.
Rochelle already kind of hit it, right? We've already sort of got that in place with the early, right? Why not replicate or leverage that model?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can leverage the model. I don't think it'd be the same people. No, I don't think it would be. I think it's a different, we can definitely utilize the template, but I think it's just a different set of people with different skill sets. Yeah, different data.
Yeah. It's just
Go ahead, Elise. You've been waiting.
But you could put it in that team.
Why would we put it in another application team?
Well, you would sort of repurpose that into more of an, so Irwin would be a tool of, would be sort of an infrastructure team. I'm just thinking out
I
loud.
politely disagree.
Now I can't tell if you're being sarcastic. 'Cause
No. I mean, I
He
don't know.
actually disagrees.
Yeah.
We actually disagree.
I don't think that is the right place for it. I don't, why would you put something that is not Irwin in Irwin governance?
No, not in urban governance. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about utilizing a technical skill set.
Evolving the Irwin team to encompass more than just Irwin.
But do you want to do that though? Is that something that you would take away from your core mission?
Well, we are in the process this year of doing a recompete for the Irwin contract, so if it's something that we wanted to account for, we wouldn't necessarily be taking it away from Irwin. We'd be building it into the long-term plan of the organization.
I'd rather build it into an enterprise governance solution and call it that.
But
You
that,
want to make that Irwin?
no, I don't want to make it
No.
Irwin. I want that team which already got that skill set.
Use the
I'll
team.
let all of you hash that out again, above my pay grade.
Well, no, I
You
mean,
guys
no,
talk
we
through
have
it.
to agree. I'm just putting the idea out. Because we've got.
Yeah, words are important, yeah, and I think it's, so I think the same way that we've talked about, like, going forward with what we've been talking about today for this enterprise geospatial capability, right? We're gonna wanna call it something besides EGP.
Oh, for sure.
And so, because it is something different. And so it gets really, really confusing when you say, we're gonna make the Irwin team is gonna do this, right? It's like,
So let's take a step back because I hate the fact that we had to name it anything, I'll be honest with you, and not call it what it was. But the reality is we had to do that because of our CPIC process that was in place at the time. Because what it is an integration platform. That's what it is. It's a black box that sits behind all the different applications and their services that they call on that data from. Okay, so we're talking about a capability, a geospatial capability that offers up services and data. That's what we're talking about. And applications are going to go to that when we identify what those applications are. They're going to go to that to leverage that. So that's, I think, what Steve is trying to allude to.
Thank you.
yeah, but I see the integration capability that the Irwin team provides to the community and this geospatial infrastructure support. I don't see those as the same thing.
They're not function.
They're not the same thing.
I'm not saying they're the same thing, okay, but they.
So
need to
why
follow
would
us
you,
to-
why
they need
would
to-
you use the Irwin governance, the Irwin?
So
We can have those discussions later.
I
Sure.
I
This might be a
think we're
bridge too
solved.
far.
That's probably a bridge too far.
Let's let Elise go ahead.
Yeah, let's. I agree.
I just,
I want most to help.
no, I want money, that's what I want. Well, you had talked about like those pots of money, going back to the money that Kara brought
Sure.
up again, like, the contract. They kind of affected how you could bring that money in, but like, I just wanted to point out, like, we're currently doing capacity-based contracts, so we actually have the mechanism, if we get some funding, we can bring on a team of people and do the update that needs to happen for the enterprise, right? So
Sure.
I think that is progressing and that the applications can use money if it's out there.
Yeah.
A little bit easier than we could.
Yeah, the capacity-based contracting, I think, is a really great way because that's what we're looking at doing with IDME as well, because then it's like if funding becomes available or we have a priority, we can just bump the funding up, we bump the team up for however long we need and then bump it back down, right? And so it gives us that capability. And that's why I think again, this is like I think I know on the Forest Service FAM side, this going to this capacity-based contracting is the direction that the last several contracts have done. But like being able to incorporate that across the enterprise on the DOI side as well, so that we have that flexibility. Then if we have that pot of money and we say, we have this event kind category change data standard, this fire cause data standard that's like big, then we can say, here's some money to help you applications get this done, because then then we get that data so much faster instead of waiting for 10 years before we
Yeah.
see the benefit of a standard that we've,
And it keeps us in alignment.
And it keeps us in
all
line.
able to Talk to each other in the way that we want to do, whether
Brendan had a question.
So back to geospatial and Irwin, you kind of highlighted it's different. But at the same point, the Irwin infrastructure is built off of geospatial data. Like it's the same infrastructure there. So when we were talking about it, though it may not necessarily be the same, we are using the same technology and infrastructure that would be required to use geospatial because we use geospatial data for. So if that's something we're looking at, it could be enterprise level versus just what it is now. And when we're talking about Irwin team, there's ways to expand contracts to account for more than just one system to make it an enterprise level contract versus just a.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't really know your infrastructure, but you're mostly based on ArcGIS Online though, correct?
Yes, sir.
Oh, you do have ArcGIS server? Okay, sorry, I didn't know who I was looking at. I'm looking at all the faces.
You can look at me, and I'll look at Dave.
Yeah. So you do have a server backbone plus ArcGIS Online with Observer.
Yeah, the Geo platform.
Yeah.
Right,
Geo platform.
yeah, but the primary services are running from our server.
So it is not a black box. It is an actual
It's
ArcGIS server.
server, SOI.
Yeah.
On top of that, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was built for more of a management process. It's not to understand the workflow and see where the data and how it's moving through the environment. It's not, I don't know if it's intended now, but it wasn't at the time intended for public mass consumption. It was truly used as an administrative tool.
But maybe that's something they could leverage if it was more scalable, if we built out an infrastructure, but I don't know what that lift would be to move from.
I would say that's a governance question. I wouldn't.
yeah, so,
What are we on time? Because I'm sick of talking.
I think people might need a break as well.
Yeah.
yeah, I think we want to take a break because what we have on the agenda next is to come back and just have a discussion about data integration. Like we stood up Irwin, started developing Irwin 13 years ago, and we've learned a lot of things. And so we just kind of wanted to talk about data integration as a whole, not necessarily Irwin, right? Irwin, it's easy for us to use Irwin as a substitute for the bigger concept of data integration, but just kind of capture some things from the experience of the people in the room, what's worked well about data integration, what are the challenges that we've had about data integration, so that as we start thinking about this interoperability into the future and other types of integration, that we capture some of those lessons. So it's probably a good time to take a break, 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and kind of circle around some of that.
Well, thanks for listening to me. I'm done for the day.
Yeah.